Okay, we're going to go ahead and begin with some values. So, changing the lightness and darkness to make something look three-dimensional. First of all, when you're starting to draw, you have to know something about pencils. And so you were given 4 different pencils, and even though 3 of them look pretty much the same, if you look carefully at them, they are all labeled differently. So one of them says HB, one of them says 4B, one says 2H, and then you have another one that's called a layout pencil that's pretty dark. So all of these letters and numbers mean something different. And so basically, you have to understand what pencils are used for. Your H pencils, okay, so anything that has an H on it is going to be relatively hard. So H stands for hard, okay, and as the number of the pencil gets higher, so you can have an H, or what we call a 1H, or a 2H, or a 3H, or a 4H, 6H, 8H. As they move across, they get harder, okay? You typically use H pencils when you're doing drafting or architecture. In drawing, we don't really shade with these. We might use, like the one I gave you, which is the 2H, we might use that to draw something out, but we wouldn't use it necessarily to shade anything. The middle pencil, the pencil that's kind of in between the hard and the soft one, is your typical HB pencil. And so you were given one of those too. That's also a number 2 pencil, the one that you normally have for school for taking tests. So your HB and your number 2 pencil are exactly the same. So if you lose your HB, that's okay. That one's good also for lightly drawing things out and doing some light shading. So you have that one as well. And then basically as you go here, you have a 1B, you can have a 2B, 3B, 4B, okay? Normally it goes all the way up to maybe like a 10B. And as those numbers get higher, those values get softer, right, or darker. So the pencil, the B, stands for brittle. So as it moves this way, the pencil gets more and more brittle. And so as it gets more brittle, it gets darker. So this is the 4B pencil. You can see that it comes in pretty dark. And if you compare that to your HB pencil that you have, it's not as dark. And that was the same amount of pressure that I used. Okay, so what we're going to do is work on our value scales. And if you're trying to make something look three-dimensional, you want to have a wide range of lightness and darkness. So like if I look at the photo example, you can see that the hair is really, really light. It's not white, but it's really light. You would have some light values on this shoulder, and then it would gradually get darker as you moved over to the edge of it. And then the space in the negative space is really, really dark. So you have to think about what pencil would be good for each of those. So we're going to just practice good shading technique first. So if something is white, if something has a white highlight, leave the white of the paper. So if you want to make something white, just leave it by itself. Don't add anything. And then what I want you to do is to make a step from a light value all the way to a black. Now you're never going to get to a true black with graphite pencils, but you're going to get to a really dark gray. Okay? So you want to try to get the darkest gray that you possibly can. So I usually use my HB pencil for my light values. You can try your H, but I find it's very scratchy. And what you want to do is choose really short, light, close, overlapping marks. So you want to keep them nice and tight. Okay? You want to try to use the tip of the pencil rather than using the edge of the pencil, which will make it look more like a rubbing. So I'm going to go across one way, and then I'm going to try and cross shade. So I'm going to go and even it out so it's nice and smooth. Notice that the lines are nice and close together so that it creates a very smooth surface. That's how I'm going to be able to get the smoothness of the skin. Okay? Now as I move over to the next one, I can use a little bit more pressure, but also I can go over it more times if I want to make it have a slightly darker value. So I go one direction, then I go another direction, and I should be able to see that there's a clear distinction in values. I want this one to look darker than the one that came before it. try to stay in the lines. I'm not outlining, but I can cross shade here to kind of clean up that mistake. And then, of course, I can use an eraser to clean up the edges. Because, of course, when you would be drawing, it'd be important to stay in the lines. Okay, so as I start to move to a darker area, I don't want to keep having to do so much work. So I'm going to go ahead and grab my 4B pencil. And you're going to notice that the 4B pencil is a lot softer. And so this one, you can see, is even darker already than the third one that I shaded, or the second one that I shaded, I should say. So I'm going to go over it in one direction, a second direction, to make it be a flat, smooth, darker value. And I can go over this as many times as I need to so that each of these look distinct. Okay, so I'm going to keep doing this nice, short, close, overlapping marks until it's all the way done. If you want to switch and use your extra black pencil at the very end, you could do that as well. I could even shade on a diagonal if I wanted to make it nice and smooth. Oops. Into the camera. Okay, so when I get to the very end, I want this value to be as dark as it possibly can be. So maybe I'm going to use the extra black, and I'm going to go over it until there's really very little white paper showing underneath of this. I don't want to press hard. If I press hard, I'm going to bruise the paper. So I'm just going to go over this as much as I can to get a nice, solid value. Go back here and do this one. I want to make sure we see a difference between them. So you can see I gotta make this one darker than the last. And then this one, right? So I gotta keep going over it until it's darker. Okay, if by chance, when I'm using my pencils, I go too dark, you can also use your kneaded eraser. So a kneaded eraser is like putty, and you can pull it and put it into whatever shape that you need. What you can do is if you went too dark, instead of erasing like you normally do with your rubbing something, you can press down and it will take off a layer of the graphite and leave a slightly lighter value. So that will help prevent it from smudging. So if you needed to do any changes, you could. Now with the gradation scale, we're going to basically use the values that we have on our stepped scale, our tonal scale. We're going to make the values go down, but instead of having crisp, distinct sections, we're going to have a continuous gradation from white all the way to black. Now, I actually rather go dark to light than light to dark. So it's a matter of preference for you as well. There's all different brands of pencils, and you're welcome to get more than what I've given you. Like this is a 6B, and so it's really, really soft. I could also just use my extra black, of course, like I did before. And what I like to do is I like to start in the dark section first, and then gradually ease up on the pressure so that it gets lighter and lighter and lighter. So what we want to do is to see a nice smooth transition. That's how I'm going to make this shoulder look round. So I'm going to start with dark, move across, and as I ease up on the pressure, it's going to get lighter and lighter and lighter. So I still need to work this across the entire scale. This is probably way too light to be underneath this value, but it gives you an idea of how we're going to do this as we move across. So I can still cross shade if I need to smooth it out, counter shade, okay, and I can ease up on the pressure to get smooth transitions. Now this is the point where a lot of people want to switch pencils. So they're like, oh, it's too dark. So maybe what you want to do is go to your HB or your 4B and get it to smooth out a little bit. I actually like doing my value typically with like one kind of pencil. And normally through pencil pressure, I'm able to get a wide range of value by just using a single pencil. And of course this takes a little bit of time and skill and practice. So if you don't get to this point in your drawing right now, that's okay. But eventually you probably will be able to. Okay, so let's say you accidentally get a crisp line. Right? You see that line right there? What you're going to do is you're going to go in and softly fade it. So very, very light pressure. I'm barely pressing. Right? And if I just kind of smudge that in between with the pencil tip, I can gradually get it to fade away. Notice that I'm not smudging with my fingers. I don't let people start to smudge until they're in a more advanced class. When you smudge, what happens is you get a dark value and a gray value, but no in between. And we're going to use pencil pressure to get smooth transition so we can make that round shadow look really good. Okay, so you keep going over this until you get a nice, smooth transition so that it looks something like that.